Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis, where we explore that age-old question. So, is there a link between creativity and mental illness?
Right.
Today, we're diving into the life of a woman who was called mad and fantastical and original-brained all during her lifetime. Margaret Cavendish, Duchess of Newcastle.
Yes.
You might know her best for her wild descriptions in her book, The Blazing World.
Yes.
Where like a whole world is contained within an earring.
Yeah.
Or her visions of talking birds discussing the cruelty of humanity. I mean,
It's pretty wild stuff.
it's crazy, yeah. What's fascinating about Cavendish, though, is that she was producing this like incredibly creative work in 17th century England.
Yeah.
A time when women were largely expected to be seen and not heard,
Right.
let alone writing philosophical treatises and scientific theories.
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating about Cavendish is that she was doing all of this in a time when it was so out of the ordinary, like you said.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, like, if that pressure to conform, to fit into this, like, very narrow box that society had created for women, if that contributed to those anxieties that she documented in her personal writings.
Yeah.
Like, is that a piece of the Mad Genius Thesis puzzle?
It's certainly a piece we need to consider. I think so.
Yeah.
But to understand that, let's start by kind of unpacking Cavendish's early life.
Okay.
And the influences that kind of shaped her worldview, her way of thinking.
Right.
She was born into a wealthy family, surrounded by siblings, and participated in all these lavish social events. But she described herself as shy and awkward in those settings.
Oh, wow.
She instead sought solace in nature, preferring her own contemplations to the demands of aristocratic society.
It seems like a contradiction, doesn't it?
It does.
Like this woman who craved solitude, yet went on to publish a vast body of work.
Right.
Much of it daringly unconventional for its time.
Yes.
Like, do we see any early hints of that independent spirit in her childhood?
We do, yeah. Even though formal education for women was limited, she was a voracious reader, devouring books on all sorts of subjects.
Wow.
And this is where it gets really interesting. She developed a deep fascination with natural philosophy, what we now call science.
Oh, wow.
And this wasn't just a passing interest. Like, she wrote extensively on complex topics like atomism, magnetism, and even the nature of the universe itself.
Hold on. A 17th century woman writing about science.
Oh, no. It's kind of crazy.
They had to raise some eyebrows back then.
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, her interest in these subjects went beyond just reading and contemplating. She actively engaged in discussions and debates, even corresponding with prominent scientists like Christian Huygens.
Wow.
And you have to remember, she couldn't conduct her own experiments due to the limitations placed on women at the time.
Yeah.
But that didn't stop her from challenging the scientific theories of her day, even critiquing renowned thinkers like Thomas Hobbes and René Descartes.
Wow, it sounds like she was fearless, like taking on the intellectual giants of her era head on.
But let's talk about that fantastical element in her writing that we hinted at earlier. We can't talk about Margaret Cavendish without mentioning the vivid imagery, the almost surreal worlds.
Yeah, the worlds within worlds.
She creates in her plays, poems, and even her utopian novel, The Blazing World.
Right.
Her writing style was truly unique. Imagine, like, a world contained within an earring.
Yeah.
Or birds holding, like, philosophical conversations about the cruelty of humankind. These weren't just, like, whimsical flights of fancy.
No.
They were often infused with the scientific concepts she grappled with. It's almost as if she's trying to, like, make sense of the world around her using both the language of science and the boundless possibilities of imagination.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's like she's trying to bridge those two worlds.
Yeah. The world of, kind of hard science and observation, and then this world of imagination and creativity.
It's fascinating to think about how those two, like, seemingly disparate worlds, science and fantasy, collided in her work. Do you think she was consciously trying to bridge those gaps?
I think so.
To find connections between, like, the observable world and the realm of the imagination?
Yeah, I think she was. I mean, remember, she was writing during a time when scientific understanding was still in its infancy.
Right.
And religious beliefs held a really powerful sway over people's understanding of the universe. So perhaps her fantastical elements were a way of reconciling those conflicting worldviews.
Yeah.
Blending her scientific curiosity with the imaginative storytelling traditions of her time.
And we can't forget that she was also a woman,
Right.
navigating a world dominated by men.
Yeah.
Where her intellect and her ambition were often met with, like, skepticism.
Oh, yeah.
Or outright dismissal. Could those fantastical elements have been a form of rebellion? Like a way of pushing back against the limitations placed on her?
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. In her writing, she could create worlds where women held positions of power, where intellect was celebrated above all else. It's almost as if she was envisioning a reality where her own brilliance could be fully recognized and celebrated, a reality that was denied to her in the real world.
So are we seeing a link here between those societal constraints?
I think so.
Her unconventional writing style and the anxieties she documented in her personal writings.
It's a thread we need to keep pulling on. Yeah. And speaking of those anxieties, Cavendish's life wasn't without its challenges.
Right.
Despite her privileged upbringing and her marriage to William Cavendish, the Duke of Newcastle, who was a very devoted husband and actively encouraged her writing, she still struggled with personal anxieties, particularly surrounding her inability to conceive children, their precarious financial situation after the English Civil War.
It's a reminder that even those with, wealth and social standing aren't immune.
Right.
To the complexities of human experience.
Yeah.
To the anxieties and fears that can plague even the most brilliant minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes you wonder if those anxieties, combined with her unconventional thinking, were like the fuel for her extraordinary creativity.
This brings us back to the core question of our deep dive, right? Is there a link between creativity and mental illness? In Cavendish's case, we see a woman with extraordinary creativity and intellectual curiosity, but she also grappled with these anxieties and these fears.
Right.
And while we can't diagnose her with a specific condition based on historical accounts, her life certainly invites a deeper exploration of that potential link between mental health and creative expression.
And maybe, just maybe, by exploring the life and work of Margaret Cavendish, we can gain a deeper understanding not only of her unique genius, but also of the complexities of the human mind itself.
Absolutely.
Stay with us as we continue our deep dive into the world of Margaret Cavendish in the next part.
I can't wait. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're peeling back the layers of Margaret Cavendish's life and work to see if we can understand what made this brilliant but unconventional woman tick.
Last time, we left off with Cavendish, wrestling with those complex scientific theories and challenging philosophical heavyweights and, conjuring up these universes where even inanimate objects could think and feel.
Right. It's in those moments that we see the depth of her imagination, her ability to envision these worlds that were both, fantastical but also deeply philosophical. But those visions didn't come out of nowhere, right? They were shaped by her experiences, her relationships, and the tumultuous times in which she lived. So let's rewind a bit and delve deeper into those formative years.
Okay, so let's zoom in on her childhood then.
Okay.
We know she was born into this, aristocratic family, a world of privilege and social expectations.
Yeah.
But we also heard that she preferred the company of sheep and, the management of a grange to these more feminine pursuits.
Yeah.
It seems like there was already a tension there.
Right.
Between the world she was born into and the world she wanted to create.
Absolutely. And it's in her relationship with her mother, Elizabeth Lucas, that we see the seeds of that independent spirit being sown.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Elizabeth was a strong-willed, independent woman herself, and she instilled a sense of self-reliance in her children.
Yeah.
While Margaret did receive instruction in the traditional subjects, needlework, household management and things, she was also given an unusual degree of freedom to explore her own interests.
So it wasn't a typical upbringing for a young woman of her time. She wasn't confined to the drawing room, learning how to be a proper lady of society.
Not exactly. She later wrote about how much she enjoyed spending time outdoors, observing nature, and indulging in her own contemplations, which is kind of a word she uses often.
It makes you wonder, did those early experiences of solitude, of being surrounded by the vastness of nature, did that like shape her fascination with the unseen forces that govern the universe?
I think that's certainly a possibility. It's as if she was seeking to understand, like, the hidden mechanisms behind the beauty and complexity she observed in the world around her. And she wasn't alone in this pursuit. She was particularly close to her brother, John, who shared her love of learning and encouraged her intellectual curiosity.
Oh, nice.
He was an early supporter of the Royal Society, which was like at the forefront of scientific inquiry in England.
Yeah.
And it was likely through him that she was like introduced to many of the scientific concepts that would later influence her writing.
So we're seeing this like confluence of influences here, like her mother's independent spirit, her own love of nature, and then her brother's passion for science.
Yeah.
It's almost like the perfect recipe for a mind that would go on to challenge conventions and envision like worlds beyond the realm of ordinary experience.
Right, and we can't forget the impact of the English Civil War.
Oh, right.
A period of just immense upheaval that forced her family into exile in France.
Right.
And that experience of displacement, of losing their home, their social standing, undoubtedly shaped her worldview and fueled her introspective nature.
Exile must have been like incredibly difficult, especially for someone who like found solace in familiar surroundings.
Right.
Do you think this period of like uncertainty and upheaval contributed to those anxieties she documented in her personal writings?
It's very likely. I mean, trauma and displacement can have a profound impact on creative expression. And we see this time and again in the works of artists and writers who have experienced significant upheaval in their lives. It's almost as if the mind, forced to confront this chaos and uncertainty, seeks refuge in creating these new worlds, new narratives as a way of coping with the turmoil of reality.
So maybe those fantastical elements in her writing, those like strange and wonderful worlds that she created, were a way of like processing those challenging experiences, a way of finding solace in these imagined realities.
It's a compelling theory and one that resonates with the broader themes we're exploring here. It's as if the very act of creation, of giving form to those inner visions, provided her with this sense of agency and control in a world that often felt unpredictable and chaotic.
And it's in those creations that we see her scientific and philosophical ideas taking shape, often intertwined with her imaginative musings. She wasn't afraid to like weave these complex concepts about like the nature of matter, movement of the planets, the intricacies of the human mind, all into her plays, poems, and even her utopian fantasy novel, The Blazing World.
Exactly. She wasn't bound by like the rigid conventions of scientific writing that were kind of emerging during her time. She kind of embraced this more fluid approach, allowing her imagination to inform her scientific inquiries and vice versa.
Wow.
Creating this really unique blend of observation, speculation, and creative expression.
So it wasn't just a case of like science informing her fiction or fiction illustrating scientific concepts. It was more of this like symbiotic relationship, this like constant interplay between the rational and the imaginative.
Precisely. And this is part of what makes her work so challenging, but also so rewarding to unpack. She wasn't content with simply presenting these like dry scientific theories or philosophical arguments. She wanted to engage with these ideas on a much deeper, more visceral level to make them come alive through the power of her imagination.
And this brings us to one of her most intriguing concepts, this idea of self-moving matter.
Oh, yeah.
It's a concept that seems both like fantastical but strangely prescient.
Right.
Like almost a precursor to modern theories about the interconnectedness of all things.
Right.
Can you explain this concept in more detail? Like how did it fit into her worldview?
So imagine a universe where everything is alive, pulsating with energy. Even like the seemingly inanimate objects around us. This was the essence of Cavendish's concept of self-moving matter. She believed that all matter, even rocks, trees, even the air we breathe, possess this inherent capacity for motion and sensation. This wasn't just like a metaphorical notion for her. She saw it as the fundamental driving force behind all natural phenomena, from the growth of plants to the movements of the planet.
So she wasn't just attributing like human qualities to nature. She was proposing this like radical reimagining of the very fabric of reality.
Yeah.
It sounds like she was envisioning this universe that was like teeming with life, this vast network of like interconnected beings constantly in motion and communication.
Exactly. And this idea permeated her writing, shaping her understanding of the natural world and informing her philosophical explorations of the human mind. It's almost as if she saw the universe as this like giant, intricate dance.
Yeah.
Where everything was in constant motion,
Wow.
responding to its surroundings, influencing and being influenced by the forces around it.
It's a beautiful and kind of mind-bending concept.
It is.
But it also seems so far removed from the prevailing scientific thinking of her time.
It does, yeah.
How was this idea received by her contemporaries? Did she find any support for her theories within the scientific community?
Not surprisingly, her ideas were often met with skepticism and ridicule from the scientific establishment. They saw her concepts as more akin to mysticism than science.
Right.
Lacking the rigor and empirical evidence that they demanded.
Yeah.
They couldn't see past the fantastical elements
Right.
to grasp the deeper philosophical and scientific implications of her work.
It's a classic case of like a visionary mind being dismissed because her ideas were simply too far ahead of her time. It makes you wonder if she had been born in like a different era with access to the scientific tools and methodologies we have today, could she have revolutionized our understanding of the universe?
It's a tantalizing question and one that speaks to the enduring power of her ideas.
Yeah.
Even though her scientific contributions were largely overlooked during her lifetime, her work continues to inspire and challenge us to think beyond the confines of conventional scientific paradigms.
And perhaps that's like the essence of the Mad Genius Thesis we've been exploring.
Yeah.
This idea that true genius often lies in the ability to like see beyond the accepted norms, to challenge conventions, to envision possibilities that others might dismiss as like mere flights of fancy.
Yeah.
It's a fine line to walk.
It is.
And one that Margaret Cavendish navigated with like remarkable courage and creativity.
Absolutely. And as we continue our deep dive into her life and work, we'll see how that creative spirit, fueled by her anxieties, her experiences, and her unconventional worldview, led her to produce this body of work that continues to fascinate and provoke us centuries later. But for now, let's take a closer look at her personal life.
Okay.
Particularly her marriage to William Cavendish, the Duke of Newcastle, a man who played a pivotal role in supporting her intellectual pursuits and weathering the storms that came their way.
Sounds like a great place to pick up in the next part. We'll delve into their relationship, explore the challenges they faced, and see how their like shared passion for creativity helped them navigate the complexities of life in 17th century England. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. We've been exploring the extraordinary life of Margaret Cavendish, Duchess of Newcastle, a woman whose brilliant mind and unconventional spirit challenged the very notion of what it meant to be a woman in 17th century England.
And we've seen how those societal constraints combined with her own personal anxieties and her deep fascination with both science and the world of imagination fueled her creative output.
Last time, we left off with Cavendish and her husband, William, returning to England after years of exile in Antwerp.
Right.
They were coming home to a changed world, a society that had been through a civil war and was still grappling with its aftermath. What was it like for them to, like, re-enter that world after being away for so long?
It was a mixed bag, for sure. On the one hand, they were relieved to be back in their homeland to reclaim their estates and resume their place in society. But they also faced the challenge of adapting to a culture that had undergone significant shifts during their absence. The court of Charles II was a far cry from the world they had known before the war, and navigating those social and political currents must have been tricky.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that sense of displacement, of being both at home and yet somehow out of sync with their surroundings, if that like found its way into Margaret's writing during this period?
It's certainly possible. In her later works, we see a deeper engagement with the social and political issues of her time. Her biography of her husband, for example, doesn't shy away from discussing the controversies that surrounded his career, including his clashes with other royalist leaders during the Civil War.
So she wasn't afraid to like delve into the messy realities of politics, even when it meant potentially jeopardizing her own social standing.
Exactly. It suggests a growing confidence in her own voice, a willingness to speak her mind, even when it meant challenging prevailing narratives or defending her husband's sometimes controversial actions.
But she never lost that spark of creativity, that ability to, like, weave together science, philosophy, and fantasy into this tapestry of words that was both captivating and thought-provoking.
Absolutely. Her output didn't slow down at all after returning to England. In fact, she became even more prolific, publishing a collection of philosophical letters, revising her earlier philosophical treatise, Philosophical and Physical Opinions,
Okay.
and even dabbling in the world of fiction again with a work called The Description of a New World, called The Blazing World.
Wait, another blazing world.
Yes.
So she revisited that fantastical realm where women held positions of power and intellectual curiosity reigned supreme.
She did. It's almost as if she was returning to that imagined world, perhaps seeking solace or inspiration amidst the challenges of reintegrating into English society. And in this later version of The Blazing World, she introduced new characters, explored new themes, and delved even deeper into her philosophical ideas about the nature of reality, the limits of human perception, and the power of the imagination.
It makes you wonder if those fantastical elements, those journeys into imagined worlds, were a way for her to process her own experiences, to make sense of the complexities of the real world through the lens of her imagination.
That's a very astute observation. Remember, she was living in a time of great intellectual and social upheaval. The scientific revolution was challenging long-held beliefs about the nature of the universe. The English Civil War had shaken the foundations of society, and women were still largely excluded from the world of intellectual discourse. Perhaps those fantastical elements were a way for her to cope with those anxieties, to find a space where she could explore her ideas freely without the constraints of convention or the judgment of the male-dominated intellectual establishment.
It's almost as if she was creating her own intellectual playground, a space where she could experiment with ideas, challenge norms, and give voice to her unique perspective.
Precisely, and it's in that space, in that freedom to explore and experiment, that we see the true brilliance of her mind shining through.
But as we've discussed, brilliance often comes at a price. We've talked about her anxieties, her preference for solitude, her struggles to fit into the mold society had created for women of her time.
Right.
It's hard not to think about the Mad Genius Thesis when we consider her life and work.
It's a thread that runs through her story, isn't it?
Yeah.
The idea that her unconventional thinking, her anxieties, her struggles to conform might somehow be linked to her extraordinary creativity.
And while we can't diagnose her with a specific mental illness based on historical accounts,
Yeah.
her story certainly prompts us to consider the complexities of the human mind, the blurry lines between genius and what society might label as madness.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that continues to fascinate and intrigue us today as we try to understand the wellspring of creativity, the spark that ignites those brilliant minds who see the world differently, who challenge our assumptions, and push the boundaries of human thought.
And Margaret Cavendish was certainly one of those minds.
She was.
She was a trailblazer,
Yeah.
a woman who refused to be silenced or confined by the expectations of her time.
She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of ideas and imagination. And even though her scientific contributions were largely overlooked during her lifetime, her work has experienced a resurgence of interest in recent decades as scholars have begun to recognize the depth and breadth of her intellectual achievements.
It's almost as if she's finally getting the recognition she deserved centuries after her death. Her voice, once dismissed as mad or fantastical, is now being heard with a new appreciation for its originality and its enduring power.
And that's the beauty of exploring these lives, these stories of those who dared to be different.
Yeah.
We gain not only a deeper understanding of their individual journeys, but also a broader perspective on the human condition, the complexities of creativity, and the enduring power of the human spirit to transcend limitations and leave its mark on the world.
Well said. And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of Margaret Cavendish, Duchess of Newcastle. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of her life, her work, and the enduring questions she raises about the nature of genius, the power of imagination, and the complex relationship between creativity and the human mind.
And if you're interested in learning more about this remarkable woman, we encourage you to seek out her writings. You might be surprised by what you discover.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those creative sparks flying.